My name is Olivia Hart, and sometimes, even now, I can still smell the old paper, that faint vanilla scent of books stacked higher than my head. I was sitting in my office that morning, sunlight spilling through floor-to-ceiling windows, my assistant buzzing softly through the intercom. "Your publisher's online too, Olivia." It should have been just another Tuesday, a meeting, a signing, and new cover design to approve. But as I lifted my phone, another notification lit up my screen, a name I hadn't seen in years.
Dad.
For a second, my heart did that stupid thing, that uneven skip it always did when the past tried to call back. I stared at the name, feeling that quiet ache crawl up my throat. My nails tapped against the mug in my hand, coffee going cold, just like old times. When I finally answered, his voice hadn't changed, rough, businesslike. "Olivia," he said, "we need to talk. It's important." I wanted to say no, to hang up, but something inside me, maybe curiosity, maybe unfinished pain, made me whisper back,
"Sure, Dad."
"When?" "Tomorrow. At the house." The same house where he once said, "Books won't pay the bills." The same house I left behind with a single suitcase and too many unsaid words. I exhaled slowly and said,
"Fine.
"I'll be there." I was 19 the day my father sold my world. Back then, our house smelled like sawdust and aftershave, Dad sent after another long day at his auto shop. My brother, Ethan, was the golden boy. Confident, loud, all plans and charm. And me? I was the quiet one, the book girl, always buried in pages instead of people. That morning, I came downstairs to find cardboard boxes stacked by the living room door, the ones from Mom's old study. My stomach sank. "Dad, what's going on?" He didn't even look up. "Ethan's opening his salon next month. We're selling the books. They'll help cover his rent deposit." For a moment, the world went silent, just the low hum of the fridge and the sound of my heart pounding in my ears. "You're selling Mom's books?" I whispered. "They're not just paper, Dad." He slammed the ledger shut. "They're dust, Olivia. They won't pay the bills. Your brother's trying to do something real with his life." I felt my throat tighten. "And I'm not." He sighed, that tired, disappointed sound. "You sit around reading all day. Stories don't pay rent. Be practical for once." Ethan stood by the doorway, arms folded, avoiding my eyes. "It's just stuff, Liv. You'll live." I wanted to scream, but instead, I walked past them, toward the study. Dust floated in the morning light, settling on the shelves that had once been Mom's pride. I ran my fingers along the spines. Austen, Hemingway, Morrison, Steinbeck, every title a memory. That's when I found it. Tucked between two worn-out novels was a note in Mom's handwriting. "When they stop believing in you, believe harder in yourself." I pressed it to my chest, breathing through the hurt. Then I grabbed one book, To Kill a Mockingbird, Mom's favorite, and slipped it into my backpack. Dad called after me, but I didn't turn around. I remember the sound of the front door closing behind me, not a slam, just a quiet click. The sound of something ending. I left with nothing but that one book, $62 from my savings, and a promise to myself. If they ever said books wouldn't pay the bills, I'd make sure they'd buy me a life. The first few months on my own were brutal. I rented a room above a laundromat in downtown Denver, the kind that smelled permanently of detergent and loneliness. The walls were thin, and the only piece of furniture I owned was a secondhand desk with one wobbly leg. During the day, I waitressed at a diner. Nights were mine, or at least I tried to make them so. I'd sit by the window, fingers numb from the cold, typing short stories on a borrowed laptop. Most of them went nowhere, but they were mine. Sometimes I'd open Mom's book, the one I'd taken, and trace her handwriting on the inside cover. It became my compass, my reason to keep pushing when everything else said stop. The first time I got published, it wasn't glamorous. A tiny online magazine, a $50 check that bounced twice. Still, I printed that story and pinned it to the wall. Proof that I existed. Proof that words mattered. Then came Margaret Hale, the senior editor of a mid-sized publishing house who stumbled upon one of my stories. She sent me an email that changed everything. You have a voice that doesn't flinch, Olivia. Let's talk. Margaret became my mentor, my guide, my unexpected guardian angel. She taught me how to edit ruthlessly, how to protect my rights, and how to believe that starving artist was just another outdated myth. Under her wing, I wrote my first novel, Ashes of August. I still remember the night I finished it, sitting cross-legged on the floor, a cup of instant ramen beside me, crying because I finally did something real. The book didn't explode overnight, but it grew, word by word, reader by reader. By the second print run, it was on a regional bestseller list. By the third, I was signing copies in the same city where I once bussed tables. When the first royalty check came in, I didn't buy a car or jewelry. I bought a bookshelf, a beautiful, heavy oak one, and filled it with the stories I used to read at home. As years passed, I wrote 3 more books, lectured at universities, and quietly built a life on words my father once dismissed. But I never told them, not when my novels hit national lists, not when I bought my own townhouse, not even when my face appeared on a magazine cover. I kept my success tucked away like that old note from Mom, private, safe, untouchable. Because a part of me still remembered the look on Dad's face when he said, "Books won't pay the bills." And I wanted my answer to come not in words, but in silence, success, and the sound of pages turning. The next afternoon, I drove back to my father's house, or what used to be home. The driveway looked smaller, the paint duller. Even the oak tree in the front yard seemed tired. I hadn't been here in nearly 10 years, but the ghosts of that last argument were waiting by the porch, whispering through the wind. Dad opened the door. He looked older, not just in his face, but in his posture. Life had bent him a little. My stepmother, Janet, hovered behind him, lips tight, the same wary look she always had when I walked into a room. Ethan was there too, tanned, loud as ever, holding his phone like it was glued to his hand. "Olivia," Dad said, almost cautiously. "You look different." "I grew up," I said softly, stepping inside. We sat around the same dining table where we'd once eaten in silence. There was that awkward air, heavy and thick, until Dad finally cleared his throat. "We could use your help," he began. "Ethan's salon." I raised an eyebrow. "Another one?" Ethan shifted uncomfortably. "Expansion. Things slowed down after COVID. We just need some capital to get it going again." I almost laughed. The irony burned slow and sweet in my chest. Dad leaned forward. "We heard you've been doing okay. Writing, teaching. You must have some savings by now." Some savings. For a moment, I just studied them. Janet's gold bracelet clinked softly against the table. Ethan scrolled his phone to avoid my eyes. Dad's fingers drummed restlessly. The same rhythm from my childhood when he was trying not to sound desperate. "Actually," I said, standing up slowly, "why don't you come by my office tomorrow? It'll be easier to talk numbers there." Dad looked surprised. "Your office?" I smiled.
Yes.
"You'll see." The next day, they arrived in a beige sedan that had seen better years. I greeted them at the glass doors of Hart House Publishing, the company I had quietly founded 3 years ago. Their eyes darted around the lobby. The modern chandelier, the framed book covers on the wall, the quiet hum of staff moving efficiently through the space. Janet's voice came out small. "All these books." "Every single one," I said, leading them toward my office. It was large but warm, sunlight flooding across oak shelves filled with editions of my novels, international translations lined neatly beside awards. A photo of me and Margaret sat on the desk, her arm draped over my shoulders. Ethan stopped mid-step.
Wait.
"This is yours." "Yes," I said calmly, taking my seat. "I founded it after my 3rd book. We represent new authors now, people who were told their dreams wouldn't pay the bills." Silence. Just the ticking of my clock. Dad's mouth opened, then closed. Finally, he whispered, "You did all this from your writing?" I looked him straight in the eye. "Books didn't just pay the bills, Dad. They bought this building." The words hung between us like a storm that had finally broken. Janet stared at the floor. Ethan shifted, eyes darting anywhere but me. And my father, the man who once told me to be practical, blinked hard, as if trying to absorb a reality that didn't fit his map of the world. For the first time, I saw not anger in him, but something else, guilt. Maybe even pride, buried under years of stubbornness. I didn't know, he muttered. I know, I said gently. You weren't supposed to. For a long time no one spoke. Ethan leaned back in his chair, the weight of silence pressing down harder than any lecture could. Janet fidgeted with her bracelet again, the same nervous rhythm she used to have when she was caught in one of Dad's bad moods. Dad finally exhaled. Olivia, I made mistakes. I didn't understand what you were doing back then. I folded my hands together. You didn't have to understand, Dad. You just had to believe. He looked smaller somehow. The proud man who once stood like a wall now hunched slightly, eyes tired. We need your help, he said again. Ethan's trying hard, but… I'm sure he is, I interrupted softly. But help doesn't come without meaning anymore. Ethan frowned. What's that supposed to mean? I stood and walked to the window, watching the city stretch beyond the glass, the skyline I'd built my life against. It means, I said, turning back, that if I help, there'll be conditions. Dad nodded slowly. What kind of conditions? I took a breath. This was the moment, not revenge, not triumph, but clarity. Ethan, if you want me to invest, you'll run a literacy program from your salon. Every Saturday morning, you'll open your doors to kids who can't afford tutoring. Reading, writing, anything that helps them believe their voices matter. He blinked. At a salon? I smiled faintly. Hair grows back. Confidence doesn't. Teach them something real. He didn't argue this time. He just nodded, almost ashamed. I turned to Janet next. You've always wanted to do charity work. I'll fund your women's outreach idea, but you'll start it in our hometown. 4 single mothers. You'll help them finish high school, get jobs. The same kind of women you used to whisper about when we lived there. Her lip trembled. I can do that. Finally, I looked at Dad. He didn't flinch. Maybe he knew what was coming. You'll set up a scholarship, I said quietly, for girls who want to study literature. You'll name it after Mom, the Grace Hart Foundation. And you'll attend every award ceremony, every single one, and shake their hands. His eyes glassed over, but his voice was steady. I will. I sat back down, feeling a calm I hadn't known in years. Then we have a deal. They all nodded, a strange mix of relief and humility in the air. Dad stood, looking around my office, once more, tracing the edges of framed covers with his eyes. I used to think words were a waste, he said softly. Now I see they built something I couldn't. For a heartbeat, the silence between us wasn't heavy anymore. It was healing. He held out his hand. I took it. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was the first chapter of something new. 6 months later, I stood in the community library downtown, the same one that once turned me away because I owed late fees. Now there was a new plaque by the door. The Grace Hart Foundation, empowering young women through words. Dad had shown up early that day, wearing his old flannel jacket, hair combed, eyes bright with something I hadn't seen in years, peace. He'd followed through on every promise. The scholarship fund was real. Ethan's salon hosted reading mornings, kids sitting in swivel chairs with books instead of mirrors, laughing at stories while he trimmed hair in the background. And Janet's outreach center? It had a waiting list. I watched them all from a quiet corner, the soft hum of voices around me like background music from a life that finally found harmony. Dad walked over, holding a stack of donated books. We've got our first batch, he said. Most of these are from local families. They wanted to help. I smiled. Guest books pay more than bills now. He chuckled, that rare sound I used to chase as a child. You were right, Liv. I just couldn't see it then. We shelved the books together, a rhythm that felt almost sacred. For once, I wasn't that 19-year-old girl fighting to be heard. I was a woman who had built something with the very thing they'd try to take away. Later that night, I went home, poured a glass of wine, and walked into my private library. Hundreds of books lined the shelves, old and new, translated editions, signed copies, Stories I'd written and stories that had written me. On the top shelf sat Mom's copy of To Kill a Mockingbird. Inside, her note was still there. Edges yellowed, ink fading but words eternal. When they stop believing in you, believe harder in yourself. I ran my fingers over it, feeling that same spark from the day I left home. A voiceover moment settled in my mind, one I'd never say out loud, but one I knew the world would feel if they heard my story. They once sold my books to fund someone else's dream. But books bought mine, page by page, word by word. Turns out they don't just pay the bills. They pay for freedom. I closed the book, smiled through the quiet, and whispered, "Thanks, Mom. We did it."